welcome to Demand and Disrupt the Disability Podcast. Here, we will learn to advocate for ourselves and each other. This podcast is supported with funds from the Advocato Press, based in Louisville, Kentucky. Sandra Williams is a retired instructor, mother of 2, and grandmother to 3 girls. She enjoys reading, writing, singing, cooking, and traveling, not necessarily in that order. Thanks for joining us, Sandra.
Thank you so very much for having me.
So in your chapter in the book, you start out talking about your parents. Now, your father was blind. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And that was from a rare genetic disorder. Is that right?
Yes, it's quite rare. It's called Peter's anomaly. And of course, back then in 1935, when he was born, no one knew that really then. He was just blind, and he was the only one of his siblings and in the family tree to that point that was blind, and he was born totally blind.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I know a thing or two about genetic disorders. Having one myself, they can, when they crop up like that, you've really got nothing to fall back on. No way. And gosh, mine was in 1990. I can't imagine 1935. That would be terrifying. And
Yeah.
your mother was not born blind. Is that correct?
Well, she was born blind, but she didn't have to. It was a tragedy, I guess, at birth.
Okay. Tell me about that. Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, my grandparents lived in the western part of the state, Bowling Green to be exact, and my mom
Bowling
was
Green being where I am right now. So my apologies for my city.
But they lived there, and I guess this was 1941. And when it came time for my grandmother to deliver, my grandfather took her to the local hospital there, and they were denied entrance to the hospital because of their race.
Wow.
He was sent back home and had to use a midwife. And when the midwife delivered my mother, she apparently used the forceps too tightly and put them around my mother's head and squeezed, thereby damaging the optic nerve.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandparents found this out when my mother was a little bit older, and they apparently brought her to Louisville and had her eyes examined, because to look at my mother's eyes, they looked perfectly normal. It was that the optic nerve was damaged when her head was held too tightly.
Wow, that is tragic. And so you were born where were you born?
I was born in a small town in Illinois, Lincoln, Illinois, and my entrance into the world was, I don't know if it was remarkable or not, maybe because, both of my parents were blind. So even though it was, I'm going to say the year, even though it was 1964, the race thing was still very much a thing. So that being the case, because my mother was afforded the opportunity to go to the local hospital. However, I'm not certain they wanted it known that my mom was at the local hospital. So my birth certificate says that I'm white.
Wow.
And as does the sister next in line to me. So I'm not sure they wanted it documented, that people who weren't white were afforded the opportunity to have a baby in that hospital.
Wow. And, that's not that long ago. That is a tragically short time ago for that to still be happening. So the shadow of racism is long. And I don't think we've gotten out of that terrible shadow yet. So, and you and your sisters did inherit the genetic disorder from your father. Is that right?
We did. I learned later. I started trying to do research on this disease when I was in college the first time. And back then there was not a whole lot. But it was at that time when I first started doing some research, it was known that it was a condition that took place in the first trimester of a woman's pregnancy when the eye is developing. When the eye develops, it's developed in stages, and there are parts of the eye that are supposed to be separate from one another. The lens, the cornea, the iris, they're all separate entities. But in this genetic defect, they don't separate, and the eyes can be fused together. Now, when that happens, that I don't know if that's what causes the glaucoma, but the fetus can have in utero glaucoma. Now, my eye was separated more so than my sister. So when I was born, my eyes looked like eyes, a distinct pupil, a distinct iris, the white part. They were distinct and remained so for quite a lot of my life. They are not so now. But when my sisters were born, their eyes were all over a blue color, meaning that they had had the glaucoma in utero, and that their separate parts of the eyes were not so separate. So it meant when they were born, they saw less than I did.
Hmm. And you were saying, so at what age did you become sort of, I guess, legally blind, or blind to the point that life as normal was going to have to change?
Well, I don't know if I ever had normal. I think my normal was so much different than what others might consider to be normal. I grew up, or even as a young child, I realized I might be different when I was about three and a half. Up until that time, I thought that all daddies had guide dogs and that their guide dogs helped them get to work. I thought that all mommies read bedtime stories with their fingers. I didn't know. I had a rude awakening when some kids across the street that I snuck out of the house to get to and tried to play with said they didn't want me because I was blind, and your mommy's blind and your daddy's blind, and we don't want you. And so I was about 3.5, and I ran home crying, asking my mom, am I blind? What's blind? And so, yes, she explained about seeing. At that time, my vision, I remember not long ago reading some old papers from when I was in elementary school. And at that point, my vision, I wasn't legally blind. My vision had said I was 20/100. When I was 18, I started having severe headaches and whiteouts where everything would just go like a white fog, and I couldn't see anything. I was probably 15 and a half or 16. We had moved to Kentucky by then, and I was taken to the Lion's Eye Institute by some school personnel to figure out what might be my problem. After they figured out I wasn't having a nervous breakdown, I was mentally sound. Yeah, they thought such. And went in and found out that I had exceedingly high eye pressures. I mean, a pressure in a person's eye should be about 12, 14. Mine was 65. So
Wow.
it was causing pain, and I was put on some medication. And at that time, it was supposed to be the end all be all in, helping to treat glaucoma. So I took pills and I took eye drops, and, to try to maintain the vision I had, as well as to afford me some comfort. Pressures that high are not comfortable.
And you later found that one of the adverse effects of one of those drugs was infertility. Is that right?
Yes, that's the only thing my doctors could figure, because all my pieces and parts were in working order. There should have been nothing to prevent me from conceiving. However, I couldn't. And so went through a list of any and every medication that I had ever taken. And the finger was pointed at a particular pill that I took to help with the glaucoma. And of course, the glaucoma doctors either didn't know or might have figured, hey, she's blind, she probably won't have children. I don't know. But there was nothing ever said to me about that medicine might cause an infertility issue.
But you are in the book, A Celebration of Family, Stories of Parents with Disabilities. So you did begin your parenting journey. You want to tell us a little about that?
I began my parenting journey when I was really young. I saw on television a news story about a baby that needed a home, and the baby was blind. And it's funny that baby is in another chapter in the book. But I saw that, and I was looking at that on television with my mom, and I said, one day, I want to do that. But I tried everything in the traditional way. I got married. My husband and I talked about having children. We attempted, and it didn't work well, because I just could not. I couldn't conceive. Went to doctors, did all that temperature taking and everything, and it didn't happen. And at the same time, I was going through more stages in this vision loss. And at that time, I had a cornea transplant and a cryosurgery, which means pretty much a needle is inserted into your eye and they freeze it to try to get your pressure to go down. So I'd had some surgeries. I didn't do too well with that. As far as my attitude, I was just sad and angry. I was still in my early 20s. My husband didn't do too well with that, apparently. We didn't do well with it together, and he went away. And so I had to deal with that. And I was still very, very young. By this time, I'm in my middle 20s. Well, I tried to do the marriage thing again. And this time, the person I was married to wasn't able to have children. But we had agreed before the marriage that we would adopt. So I was thinking I was going to, live that adoption dream I had. So time went on, and my vision got worse. I had a couple of more transplants, a couple of more glaucoma surgeries. And we were in Kentucky by this time, because my second husband and I moved to Illinois for a while. But we moved back to Kentucky and decided to go through the state's adoption program. So as a couple, we went in, and we really were not met with any issues because he was visually impaired as well. We were not met with any real discrimination on the basis of our vision. We went in there just like every other couple, with the hopes of bringing home a child, not necessarily a baby. So we went through the classes, and I guess we finished those sometime in 1990, uh, 5 into 5, first of 96. And I don't know, when it got really close to this baby or little person being in our lives, my husband told me he was going bowling, but he never came back. So that was a little painful.
Wow.
Yeah. So I asked the instructor of the class, I said, well, when I get my life together, because after you go through a divorce and you've been married a while, you've built up things, a house, all that. And I lost all that. So I said, when I get my life together, will I be able to do this as a single parent? I was told that I would. So I said, okay. So after he left, I spent the next probably 3 years rebuilding my life, working, saving, finding a better, a place to live that wasn't my really nice house, and just trying to, take the steps, talking to someone and just trying to heal. Before I thought it was a good idea to bring a little person into my life.
And when you did, you got a son.
And yes, I did.
And he had some challenges. Is that correct?
My son had some challenges. When it came time for me to think about this again, it was 1999, and I called the state and asked, what I needed to do to get back on the list to adopt and everything. And they said, well, hey, we have a new set of classes, and if you want to take these classes, it's called concurrent planning. And if a child is placed with you, you will have the first opportunity to adopt that child. So you would foster and then you could adopt. Would you like to go through the classes? And I said, okay, why not? So I went through the class. That was probably 4 or 6 weeks. And I got out of the class it was probably January something. And of the year 2000. And I didn't think too much about it. And I went through some difficult times then. I just started a new job working for the city of Louisville. I was actually on the mayor's personal staff. So I just started a new job. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, passed away, had to deal with a funeral. And a week after she passed away, her sister, one of my great aunts, passed away. And then after that, a week after that, a very dear friend passed away. So I was taking funeral leave and everything. And then I get a call from the state. Hi, we have a boy. We think he's blind. We want him. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, give the blind woman the blind baby. Yeah, I'll take him. And it was probably February 27th, 28th, almost the end of February. And they called and I said, okay, what do I do? And they said, well, we'll bring him to you. Wow, that's interesting. We'll bring him to you. So, I didn't have anything because they told me this baby was going to be 9 months old. And the only thing I had in my house, I had a bassinet. Well, 9 months old, they can't fit a bassinet. I had a little rattle. That's all I had. And I thought, oh, what am I going to do? And I was friends with a lady who had fostered probably at that time around 300 babies who all were high risk, feeding tubes, everything. She took all sorts of babies so they wouldn't have to go into the local, for lack of a better word, orphanage. And she and her husband adopted them. So I called her. I said, do 9-month-old babies eat food? What do they eat? What do I need? I was totally panicked. And it was about 10 o'clock at night. She said, let me find someone to watch the kids. And she had 2 or 3 babies at that time. And she said, I'll be there. So she came over. She took me to Kroger and we bought baby cereal and baby food. And, so very early in March, I think it was around March 3rd, I went home from work and was waiting for this baby, and a state car pulled in front of my house, knocked on my door and said, are you Ms. Williams? I said, yes, I am. He's like, here's your baby. And he put this thing into my arms. And I thought, oh, this is kind of big. And he had a hefty cinch sack. And he said, here's this thing. Have a nice day. Now, this thing he placed into my arms was soaking wet. He'd been at court all day. That's the process. They have to do a process and put the baby into care. So there I was standing in my tiny little living room, looking down at this human being. I could still see some, and it was love at first sight. He had the big eyes and the long lashes. And as I look at this human, I mean, that my heart just overflowed with emotion for this baby. But I knew in that same instant that everything wasn't as it should be. I could feel that the bottom part of him was heavier than the top part of him. And no, not because he was soaking wet, but I wasn't sure. So I put him on the couch beside me, and I figured 9 months old should move around while I'm trying to change this diaper, but he didn't move his legs and he didn't move anything from his hips down. He would wave around with his head and he didn't make noise. 9 months old are supposed to coo and gurgle. And I'd worked in a preschool, so I knew about kids, and this one didn't do what kids should do. So I spent that afternoon trying to learn this little human. And first thing I did, I got a bottle. Wasn't sure whether you were supposed to heat up a 9-month-old bottle or not, but I did. And I put it in his mouth, and the lid, oh, I'm so embarrassed. The lid promptly fell off. So I pretty much almost with the and I'm like, oh, what do I do now? So I picked him up and I took him in the kitchen. I didn't have a baby tub because I didn't even have a bed at this point. And I put him in the sink and I washed him off. I washed me and dressed us and everything. And later my mom came and I'm like, here, Mom, what do I do with it? And she too noticed that he wasn't doing what a baby at 9 months should do.
Mm-hmm. And what ended up being, was there a diagnosis of something going on?
When he was I did foster him for quite a while, but it was about 13 months. I took him to a neurologist because I knew something wasn't right. And I put him in our First Steps program, program that works with babies, little people who are not developing as they should. So I put him in First Steps and in VIPS, visually impaired preschool services, because he had a severe nystagmus, meaning that the eyes just bounced around and could not focus. So he was in that. But they recommended that I take him to a neurologist. So I did. And, there's the room in the hospital. If you had anyone in the hospital, the room. And after they do the test, they call the family to the room. Well, I was by myself. See, I did most of this by myself. So I went to the room by myself, very nervous, sitting across from neurologists, and those individuals can be somewhat intimidating, big words, that attitude. And he looked at me and he said, there was water on, in his brainstem. He said it would probably be okay, but he said my son would never walk, talk, or know who I was. He also said that no one would fault me if I just gave him back. And I just sat there, the stomach dropping, that feeling, and I said, "Where's my baby?" And they went and brought him to me, and I picked him up, held him in my arms, and walked out of the hospital, got on the bus, and went back home, knowing that I was not giving this baby back, if I were afforded the opportunity to adopt him, knowing that I would do as a parent whatever I needed to do to help him thrive and develop to live the best life he could.
That is amazing. What year was this that this happened?
He 2000 and 2000.
Wow.
Yeah, 2000.
And a doctor thought it was okay to completely dismiss a human being or a woman's feelings about that. That is truly incredible. So let's fast forward and tell me, how is your son now? I know in the book you say he did walk and he does know who you are. So tell us about that.
Yes, he knows who I am. A lot of I was fortunate and blessed. I had a lot of awesome supports. My parents, supported me and absolutely. I ended up naming my son Sean Michael.
Oh, that's pretty.
They adored Sean Michael. And my sisters adored Sean Michael. And he didn't walk when he should have walked. He was about to half. And we were in a doctor's office waiting to fit him for another pair of braces. And I had to put him down to dig out my insurance card. And he could stand by me, but he would never walk. So I stood him up by my knee. And I was digging in my purse for the insurance card. And I reached out to find him and he was gone. And so I started sobbing in the orthopedics office because he had walked. And that was the first time he walked. And once he walked, even though he wore braces, he wanted to go. He wanted to roll balls. So he got a basketball in his hand when he was probably 3. He started preschool at 3. At about 8, I put him in Special Olympics and he did bowling, and he's done something with a ball that either rolls or bounces or is pitched ever since that time. He did pretty well in school. I mean, he was on the alternate portfolio. So, and we won't even talk about my feelings about that, but I felt as if very diligently he remained on honor roll all 3 years of middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th. And it was awesome sitting in that middle school gymnasium and graduated from 8th grade. And he was the only student in the ECE program who had maintained grades for honor roll. He was only one of about 8 or 10 kids in the whole school. And that was one of the biggest schools in Jefferson County. So I was a little bit proud. He did a lot of things that no one thought he could do. One time in school, there was an announcement and it said apparently that if anyone wanted to try out for the African American History Month program, they needed to raise their hand and their teacher would let them know what to do. And the teacher called me and she said, "Miss Williams, Sean raised his hand, but the school has never let," I didn't like the word never let a child from my class participate in the assembly. And I said, "My child will participate. If he tell him what to do, I'll help him. If he gets picked, yay. If he doesn't, that's okay. But he should be afforded that opportunity." So he had to memorize a portion of Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream address.
Mhm.
Well, I helped him with that, and we were so tired, and we were going on, created equal and all this thing. And they had been also talking about Abraham Lincoln. I said, Sean Michael, we're going to do this one more time, then mom has to go to bed because we're too tired. He said, tell me the address. And he said, 77 years. And went on to talk about he had combined the two addresses. It was awesome. But the next day after he tried out, the teacher called me, and I guess Sean was probably 4th or 5th grade. The teacher called me and said Sean had memorized more of the I Had a Dream speech than any of the other kids who were not in an ECE classroom. So when I was sitting out there in that audience, I was, of course, sobbing again. There was my kid, the first ECE child, in the big program. He had on his suit and tie, and I was a proud mama. He got to be the first, his class got to be the first kid that went on this major field trip to Washington, D.C. Now, they were a little scared, so I had to be a chaperone, and they said, well, you can't just chaperone your own child. You have to have 2 other boys. I said, give them here. And they were not ECE kids. They were just little bad boys, and we got along just fine.
Thanks to Sandra Williams for joining us today, and thanks to everyone else for listening. Bye. Thanks to Chris Unkin for our theme music. Thanks to Steve Moore for providing our transcription. Support comes from the Center for Accessible Living in Louisville, Kentucky. And you can find links to buy the book, A Celebration of Family, Stories of Parents with Disabilities, in our show notes. Thanks, everyone.
Just for once, I think I would agree. We both know there's a difference. We've had our curtain call, and this time the writing's on the wall. War of words we can defend. Two damaged hearts refuse to mend. This situation's pointless with each and every day. It's not a game we need to play. Tried to make